Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. My wife tells me that I have no patience. She's wrong. I have what I choose to call reduced patience or selective patience. For instance, I am no longer willing to stand in long lines to get into a movie theater or a restaurant. If I go shopping for something, it is for a particular item. I go to the store, buy it, and leave. If I agree to meet someone for lunch and they are 30 minutes late and don't have a darn good excuse, I don't eat lunch with them anymore. If their excuse is, oh, I'm just running late, as one former friend of mine used to say, it doesn't cut it. One of my pet peeves for which I have no patience is the unsolicited telephone call and the robocall. I have tried to counter in a number of different ways. Once I even took a referee's whistle and blew into the phone to the woman who said, "Hello, my name is Marjorie and I'm with the credit bureau. There's nothing wrong with your credit." I usually have something to say in response to that before I hang up. It's just called selective patience. The point of all this is that seldom are we willing to commit what we say with our actions. There are some phone calls, for instance, that I do not take that alarming response. The American Cancer Society comes to mind. Everybody wants a cure for cancer. Don't like the solicitation, so what some of us do is say, well, why don't you send me some material and I'll let you know. Or there's always the other one, I gave at the office. It's the whole question about what we say and what we do, or what we say and what we may or may not do. Seldom are we willing to commit or not commit ourselves or our resources with just a simple yes or no. Jesus, in the gospel for this morning, has finally arrived at the end of the journey that he has been on and at which we have recounted for the last 3 months on our Sunday lessons. A journey from the north of Israel all the way to the capital in the south in Jerusalem. On the day he arrives, there is another parade. The first parade is that of about 1,000 Roman troops who have marched from a seaside resort bearing the governor to Jerusalem for the high holy days. There will be pilgrims from all over the Mediterranean basin in Jerusalem for that event. The soldiers are there to keep the peace. It is a trying time. They don't want a demonstration. The other parade that day comes from 2 miles away, and it is Jesus and his disciples, Jesus riding on the back of a donkey. The crowds have all heard of him. They want to hear what he has to say. They want, hopefully, to see him perform one of the miracles that has become attached to his reputation. They break branches off of trees and bushes and wave them, clearing the way for him to ride on the back of a donkey. He comes into the middle of the city, to the high holy place, to the temple. There awaits the temple leadership, the chief rabbi and his followers, the merchants who occupy the outer courtyard of the temple, selling their sacrificial animals. Everything from sheep to birds. The temple authorities know of Jesus. They know he is coming. The word has spread. They greet him standing on the steps of the temple, probably locked arm in arm. And they confront him. By what authority do you do these things and say the things that you say? By what authority? Jesus says, let me ask you a question. If you answer it, then I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Was John the one they call the baptizer from God, or was he just blowing his own horn? And they know in their hearts and in their minds that it's a question they can't answer. If they say he was from God, then the obvious response is, why didn't you listen to him? If you say he was blowing his own horn, the people loved him and respect him, and they'll rise up in rebellion. And so their response is, we won't answer your question. And Jesus says, I won't answer the question you asked me. But then he goes on to say to them, or tells them a story. The yes and no boys story. A man has two sons. To one he asked to go into the vineyard to work that day, and he says, no, I've got other plans, but later changes his mind and goes. He asks the second son, who says, I'll go, but he never shows up. Which of the two did the will of the Father? And they are forced to answer the first. The first. You see, what he's getting at is the congruence between what we say and what we do. What we believe and how we put that belief into action. In case you're wondering if this is a sermon about the good son versus the bad son, it's not. Matthew obviously thinks that the first son is the better of the two. But that's really not, I believe, the point of the story. I think the real point of the story has to do with the woeful distance between what we say and what we do. What we proclaim and how we live. Between our language and our lives. I think words have power. Words have power, and we speak words, and they ought to be emphasized by congruent behavior. To do what we say. I'm sick of public figures who proclaim one thing and behave in another way. And you can quote me to Tom Price on that. We turn on the tube to all of those figures who make eloquent speeches but live differently. My next door neighbor told me yesterday that she no longer watches anything having to do with politics on television. And I said, well, that only leaves football. It's no secret that the fourth gospel, John's gospel, is my favorite gospel. It's written in beautiful Greek in the original language. It's easy to read. And I like the imagery in it. In that gospel, Jesus uses 7 words. Words that are spoken, but words on which he gives living examples. The first having to do with a party, with joy. The word joy. Talks of a wedding feast. They go to the wedding feast and are told that there is not enough wine. And so he takes 120 gallons of water and turns it into the good stuff. And they were all joyful. The last of those 7 words that he utters is forgive. It's the last thing he says as he's dying on a cross in great pain. Father, forgive them. The congruence between what we say and what we do. A year or so ago, I was asked to officiate at the wedding of a neighbor and a good friend, a former parishioner. And I was going to meet with them and read through the wedding service. And for the first time in all these years that I have done weddings, something struck me. You know, there is that part where you quiz both the bride and the groom about their intentions. Nowhere in the wedding service is the question asked of him or her, do you love her? Do you love him? It's phrased in the questions to each of them, will you? Will you love him? Will you take care of him in sickness and in health? Will you love him in good times and bad times? That loving is a process in which you grow and never becomes a completed fact. What we say and what we do. Deshaun Watson, Houston's new quarterback, his family received the first Habitat house in Gainesville. And I know the family and have been on the board of Habitat. He took his first NFL paycheck, walked into the cafeteria, and the 3 women who provide him with breakfast every morning, he gave them the check. They were all victims of the flood, of the storm. But it's what grateful looks like. The congruence between what we say and what we feel and what we believe and what we do. In closing, I want to quote my friend and associate Barbara Taylor. 30 years ago, she said this about this story of the yes and no boys. It is true that both sons break their words, but one big difference occurs to me, and that difference is that the word the first son broke was no, while the word the second one broke was yes. Here is reason for hope. For those of us who seem liable to speak our words from time to time, that the words keep us out of the vineyard and finally out of the kingdom are our broken yes words, not our broken no words. Whenever we change our minds, our no words, our refusals, our rejections, all of those denials that keep us apart from God and from one another. Whenever we break those words and say yes instead, not only with our lips, but with our lives, well, we are not likely to hear much in the way of a protest from heaven. Chances are, if you're listening, what you will hear is applause. Amen.